Okay, so good afternoon or good evening to everybody. Sorry for waiting a little bit. Tonight we are having a conversation with Behzad Khosravi Noori and Magnus Bärtås, two artists that their exhibition is currently being shown in Gallery Nova in Zagreb. It's an exhibition, Brioni, a necromantic attempt by Behzad Khosravi Noori and Magnus Bärtås, and with Tito and Paul Kupelwieser. So we're thinking of doing a combination of screening parts of the film, as well as the authors can talk about how the film was made and the whole exhibition, since this is actually a product of a 2-year work. And also it's important to say that both of them had previous experiences with working with the topics in Croatia or in the also Yugoslav context. So they are well familiar with this context and being here. And also both of them have had previous exhibitions in Zagreb. Maybe you can say a few words.
Yeah, maybe just a few words of a short introduction to the exhibition that we've shown in Galleria Nova. So as the title already suggests, it's an exhibition that reflects on the history of Brioni. It was a project that we kind of evolved together with Behzad and Magnus over the past year and a half. And the idea was to dig into the history of two figures that shaped the island's history. On one side, it's Paul Kupelwieser, and on the other side, Josip Broz Tito. With the exhibition, besides the film, which is a central piece, I would say, in their project, we've also shown various archival material that portrays these two personas and documents that have been part of their presence in the island. So I think through the discussion today, we will get a chance to see some of the materials shown in the exhibition, also some of the excerpts of the film, and we'll be able to discuss a little bit more about the process of working and some of the topics present. There's a few technical details that we'd like to mention. I see that so far everyone is also already following them, so we kindly ask you to be muted while we have the conversation going on. You can pose the questions throughout the conversation in the chat box, and then once we are done with the formal part of the presentation, you can also ask them directly here in the Zoom. And in case you want to have a central figure of the person who is speaking, you can turn to the speaker view, just so you have the face of the person who is currently speaking in the central spot. I think that's pretty much it from our short introduction. We give the floor to Behzad and Magnus.
Thank you very much. Maybe I can start with a very short description, and we switch a little bit. So the way that we thought that we could do the presentation today is quite organic, and we thought that we go to we will have some sort of virtual tour about different elements and fragments of the installation and show, and then while we are seeing some images, we could talk about the concept behind the exhibition, the project, and also mainly, of course, the film that we have made, which was very interesting, of course, for both of us, due COVID situation and also the lack of time. So we are very happy that we managed at the end to create that 32-minute film, which sort of present our state of mind in relation to the subject, Brioni. So Magnus, if you have anything to say, maybe.
No, I was just correcting you, 29 minutes film. So it's not a very important detail.
Sorry, 29 minutes, yes.
Yeah. No, we would prefer to walk through the exhibition, as I said, and talk about the different parts. And we believe that by walking through the exhibition before entering the film, one carries some impressions and images with as a viewer, but then after seeing the film, I think in a way returning to the physical material will give a different layer or level. That's at least how we plan this physical part and the black box.
So in order to continue our presentation, I share my screen. So there are some documentation from the exhibition, and while we have those documents, we talked about the different details and description of the work. So one of the very important things for us, well, you know, there is some very interesting story that first time that I heard the name Brioni was a long time ago, that me and Magnus were talking about completely different subject, and Magnus mentioned Brioni, and the only things that he mentioned it to me was existence of parrot, was called Koki. And he told me that he says Tito. So if I say that the whole idea of Brioni Island, for me personally, I started with that idea to look for a bird who says Tito, I haven't exaggerated. In 2017-18, when I was working on another project, that the first time that I visited Brioni, I understood the multi-layer form of an identity of that specific site as a very interesting island, and I was very much amazed. The things that we have done in the exhibition is partly we are looking at the history of Brioni and the historical material of that history. Just Magnus, I'm just continuing talking whenever that you think that something you could add and cut me, just or yeah, I can stop and you could follow, because I know that both of us, we could actually talk about this subject completely. So just let's keep it in a very organic way. And then that idea of utopian island was very interesting for us to look at it. However, the historical background, according to the historical fact that you can find in that specific island, goes to maybe first AD, and of course there are some evidence before BC evidence, but we decided to start everything in that specific history from 19th century. So it was actually the main kind of decision that we have made. Maybe you can continue, Magnus.
Yeah, I was not so aware of this early history of Brioni, because the way I was learned about the island was, of course, like Tito's Island. It is known for us these days as Tito's Island, but things were unfold in a way during the process, and I think what surprised us the most, perhaps, when learning about the island, was the fact that maybe Tito didn't invent very much, actually. Maybe everything was somehow already there, established on the island. The very idea of an exotic, fantastic, or alien place, a non-place, as we also call it, was already established by Paul Kupelwieser. At least that is somehow, if we would put an argument, or like even you can say some kind of conclusion around the work or our research, or we would say that this is a continuum. The history of Tito is a continuum of the history of Paul Kupelwieser, who managed to erase malaria from the island and managed to transform this quite hostile place to a very exotic, fantastic island, which had a zoo, which brought together elements which has somehow a colonial aspect also. So I believe the first room we established in the gallery, in the exhibition, is somehow pointing to that history of the first Brioni was already the exotic Brioni.
There is one very interesting fact, as Magnus mentioned, that the idea of zoo and which Brioni is very much famous for, was established by Paul Kupelwieser, and then we understood that the existence of exotic animal in that island, due to the fact of searching for some postcards. So suddenly it was actually, I think this postcard was one of the first postcards from Brioni that I have found, that suddenly I understood that, okay, so the idea of zoo is very old idea in a way, and Tito was just re-establishing or redesigning the already existing phenomenon in that island. So this is actually, if you look at the history of island, to see that how it was established as a form of utopian exotic place. While we were working on that idea of island, we started to look at the other, of course, sort of historical background, which the first room was very much established that historical material from late 19th century and 20th centuries. And the second room is part of the Brioni Island, which is most famous for, which is Tito's Island. And we started to look at it, that how is it possible to present that part in a different ways. I have to mention here that everything that you see in the first floor of Nova Galleria is somehow introduction of the film. So we are basically trying to present the historical material, the way that we are positioning ourselves within that history, the decision that we have made toward the multiplicity of the history, so on and so forth. So we try to create some sort of introduction that how is it possible to go and watch the film, because there is some sort of interesting, maybe what one could say, a distinction between the first floor and the second and black box, that the black box is very much, has a fictional capacity. But the first floor is very much dealing with historical material, with already fact in a way.
Yeah, maybe we should be clear then that first room is, maybe you said it already, Behzad, that those small images to the left when you enter the space are all postcards. I mean, real postcards. I believe there are 12 of them or something, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 13. And we thought it was also interesting to have, we show both the covers and the backside. So, I mean, it's almost evident, of course, that they are postcards, but also this small drawing and handwriting on the back has time sense to it. And this very idea that with this kind of resort, this kind of island was for bourgeoisie people. It was really the noblesse, the rich people who went there. So it was an important statement to announce that you have been to Brioni Island. If you have been to Brioni Island, you've been in a very luxurious place at the time of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. This is not the place for everyone at the time. It has a luxurious aura. And it's something that emanates within the Austrian-Hungarian culture sphere. So there was a train directly from Vienna to Pula, and not everyone could afford that, of course. And then they went to the island. We let one of the head characters in the film speak about this, how he established this resort, what he does to establish this, and what his vision is, and also how this fails in a way. and collapses. So there is a kind of dramaturgy in the making of the island and the fall of the island, if you like. But we can speak more about the two characters later on when we get closer to the film, and how we established how we wrote the text and so on, and the reasons for using this kind of fiction or speculative utterance from the characters,
which we call it necromantic, which is in the title of the project, because there are conceptually, of course, is very much related to necropolitic, and the way and that notion of necropolitic has different dimensions, which is related to animal, the dead and alive animal, and the museum that you could see in Brioni, and taxidermy animals, and also the notion of politics that in Tito's time, in Yugoslavian time. And then methodologically, we thought that necromantic is actually talking to death, is a very important form of artistic approach toward historicizing the history or the story of that island. And it was quite fascinating for us because, of course, we, as Anna mentioned, we both have done different projects in Yugoslavia in that specific geopolitical location, and we were somehow familiar with the history, and then it was a little bit challenging for us to see that how is it possible to connect two different form of mentality. One of them comes from 19th century, and the other one after Second World War and socialist Yugoslavia, Tito's island. How is it possible to bridge within them? Because at the same time that ideologically they are very much distinct and very different, but simultaneously they are following the same logic of the place. And we needed to find something in between. So the second room, I just explained about the map, and then maybe we could talk about the collages. Is sort of representation of what Brioni became during Yugoslavian time. That Brioni, which is actually this map that you could see, is representation of the actual map in the museum in Brioni, with the part which describe visually non-aligned movement. I believe that a vast majority of the images in that museum are from Museum of Yugoslavia in Belgrade. And the interesting part about that museum is when in 1984 they built that museum, is untouched. So when you enter to that part, which is the kind of representation, visual representation of Brioni during Tito's time, so you could really feel the curatorial practice of mid-80s, which is very interesting. So we decided to just emphasize the same logic that perhaps Tito was trying to present, which was Brioni as a center of the world, and then all the kind of important politicians who came to Brioni to visit Tito. There are some complications about that map because it's kind of very much related to the history of non-aligned movement, but this map is not necessarily representative of non-aligned movement, because you could see that there are places in Europe mainly, or North America, that somebody from those places visited Brioni, but those countries were not necessarily part of non-aligned movement, which, well, we are not going to talk about that history, but Brioni plays significant role since 1956 when Tito, of course, it's not the history of Brioni, but it is a kind of like a center. Brioni became very important center when in 1956, Tito visited, Nehru and Nasser visited Tito in Brioni Island.
Yeah, sorry. In a way, one can say that these rooms, they are representing things you could find in a museum in a way. So the postcards, the catalogs, the books in the vitrine, those are historical artifacts functioning as an anchor to the history, but it's like it's dead history somehow. But the difference with the experience of Koki, the parrot, which was, like Behzad said, the starting point, is that Koki says Tito's name. So in a way, we experience this as a ghost story, living history in a way, which is something very different than dead history. This is a sensation you have that history comes alive by and in this case evoked by the parrot's voice. And it's a bit of a scary thing also to experience. It has an uncanny aspect. It's something really emotional in a way, to call for the dead. So that was really what gave birth to the idea of the necromantic methodology that Behzad speak about. Let's then listen to the dead, listen to what the dead person would say. This is a speculative history writing, which is performed in the film. But this room is also somehow a reenactment of, a little more active reenactment of historical material. Is not just presenting historical material. These are all images and materials from the museum at Brioni, where we wanted to both play and work with those images. So one of the walls is, this one is representing, or we can start with this one, yeah, with the hands. So they're all Tito's hands, Tito's actions by hand in a way. Greeting, talking, picking mandarins, which were extremely important symbolically. Those mandarins that were sent to the Yugoslavian children. He's having his Panama hat, and his gestures are all isolated in this image, and the background is a postcard. And the other images and the collage is from different kind of celebrations and summits, political summits at the island. So we understood, of course, that Brioni must have been a very, very contested and charged place politically, with all the security arrangements, all the bugging, all the people trying to listen to others. So somehow in these images you will sense that there's always someone behind someone, and there's a sensation of or feeling of nervous energy also within the settings of the celebrations and the summits. Something tense there also.
Yeah, one of the very interesting aspects, and I just mentioned cigar that you could see in that image, which we played a lot with the part that Tito was playing in the film, that how the cigar plays very significant role. And as you perhaps know, that it was Cuban cigar gift from Fidel Castro, so it was kind of political gesture for Tito to present the cigar. So looking at all the elements and kind of creating some sort of collage, I'm talking about the first floor in general, or some sort of bricolage of different elements. So we have started to think that notion of necromantic, and I have to mention that I was personally very lucky, because I heard that story about Tito, and when I visited Brioni. So the first time that I visited Brioni, I went to find Cookie with the very kind of hope that he's going to say Tito in front of my camera. And I think I consider myself as the luckiest person, because we really managed to record Koki. We will show it at the end of the film, that that notion of talking to death, necromantic, was very much representative when Koki started to say Tito. For almost 2 minutes, he continuously, repeatedly, in a different ways, used that name, and it was really amazing. So, which we use it, of course, later on in the film. So there is another aspect, and this is actually, again, brought very quite challenging sort of identity for us to see that how is it possible for us to write about that history? How is it possible to create that form of 19th century to 20th century shift? And we had Koki, we had idea of talking to death, and we thought that, okay, we bring the dead people and listen to them, that how they are defining the history of the island. One very important aspect, of course, in that necromantic form of narrative strategy was that we thought that is better when we are bringing them to life, they know the future. So there is some sort of romantic idea of dead people, that they know what is happening. The death is not the end of their life and memory. The memory continuously is alive and know that. So, and then somehow it became a sort of psychoanalysis in a way, fictive psychoanalysis. At the same time that we were trying to historicize the history of Ireland from the perspective of Tito and Paul Koppelwieser. At the same time, we were trying to somehow analyze the psychology in a fictive way. So this is the first floor, basically, different elements in the first floor. And if you haven't seen the exhibition, it's very interesting to see, to go to the exhibition and see the handwriting, because some of the handwriting is not really readable. It's very complicated, and some of them is kind of written in the horizontal and vertical at the same time in order to kind of save the paper. So we couldn't basically read them. It's quite, there is some sort of coding in the writing, we could say.
Yeah, so when you enter this, when you come down to the basement of the gallery, you will encounter those 5 food objects, which are photos taken from the dioramas from the same space as they have. Just for those of you who haven't been to Brioni, there is this museum that we speak about. Is a museum of Tito and non-alignment movement in relation to Brioni, and then there is a large section on the first floor with the taxidermy of animals, and those are all animals that have had their life at Brioni. So when you're alive, you're running around on the island. When you're dead, you're into this, let's call it, mausoleum of dead animals. And this is also, of course, quite close to the idea of the necromantics, that you try to create the animals as if they were alive, you know. So in a pose that you try to imagine them in action, so to say. We were also a bit surprised or astonished by how they actually mounted the scenes in the dioramas. For instance, this very bizarre, obscene pose of George, or Georg, as he's called in the film, the orangutan who was always, and we were told this story by the guide at Brioni, the guide who was working at Tito time, that Georg was always there at every party, every summit. He was always at the important dinner parties. And he was a chain smoker, and he was an expertise on spitting. And he had a sense of hierarchies because he always managed to hit the most important guests at the table. So in the film, Tito comment on this, you will see. And then he asks, why did they put him in this pose? They don't understand my humor. But actually, there is a lot of very bizarre arrangements in this mausoleum, as we call it. It is a bit tragical, but also appealing. And then the very backdrops, as you see, also from the way we did this photo objects, are this, interestingly enough, the 19th century aesthetics. So once again, the way it's staged goes back to Kuppelwiese time in a way, or even, yeah. So aesthetically, these dioramas is connecting in a way to Kuppelwiese time from their aesthetics.
Yeah, this is a kind of interesting links that we have started to build, and those links are not necessarily historically. There's no clear evidence for them. That's why there is some sort of fictive identity in that project, which, well, one could say that the way that we are working, the form of research that we are doing is a form of artistic research, which gives us the possibility to touch in those gray part of the history and create the effective form of relationship between different irrelevant part of the histories, which we try to do it in that project. So, and then when we started to think about it, so there was a lot of conversation. We were struggling to see that how is it possible to narrate that history. Eventually, we got to some very important idea that talking about Brioni is not necessarily talking about the history of Yugoslavia, neither talking about the history of Austro-Hungarian Empire. So it's not really necessarily about individuality of the historical narrations, but we could actually largening that idea of history in relation to the way that 19th century and after that Europe tried to define Europe and European. So we take advantage of that form of conceptualization of the history, and we thought that, okay, the island, which is actually quite interesting when we turn our way of looking at that specific location, an island is actually, as Kuppelwiese mentioned in the film, an island is not an island. An island is the representation of civilization. And then we started to look at the notion of European identity. So that how Kuppelwiese wanted to present Europe. We created, of course, fictive narrations, but that fictive narrations has a lot of historical evidences that how he tried to prove himself to Austro-Hungarian Empire, that how is it possible to create brilliant colony. So we started to kind of find different links that was not necessarily very much present in the history of the island, which is the colonial mentality of 19th century white man in relation to European identity and colonial identity. These two are very much linked and interconnected, of course. So, so we started to look at it from that perspective. We started to write narrations and thought about using an actor, two actors, to act as Paul and Tito. That's why in the title we even invited them. That is a collaboration between four of us, me, Magnus, Paul, and Tito. So because we gave them individual agency, so somehow we started to hearing them and looking at them and the way that they were defining and telling us their story and their experiences.
Yeah, so both of them, we try to imagine them as very different characters. One is a sad character and very bitter, actually, about the failure of his life, the failure of his project, because Paul Kupelwieser managed to build this amazing, exotic, semi-colonial island, but his life ended in a very tragic way, and he was not even buried. He died in the wrong place because of he contracted malaria. Whereas Tito, in our interpretation, is more of a trickster. Tito doesn't have a remorse. Tito is playful, and Tito tries to imagine the life of the animals and also uses the animals as description of his own ambitions in a way, and having a close relation to the animals in our interpretation. Maybe we should start to, well, we can also mention maybe, of course, what unites them. And we already mentioned that already, perhaps, that both have in a way the same vision of this exotic place. Paul Kupelwieser tried to mimic the colony because Austria-Hungary didn't have any colonies. They failed with the colonial efforts. Whereas Tito had the colonies to come to Brioni. All the guerrilla leaders from Africa, the newly liberated colonies, they came with the animals to Brioni. They brought the animals with them, and in that sense created this image of the empire, or the whole world in a way, the whole world in one place. And still today, it's amazing. I mean, some of you have been there, and it is amazing that it is such a strange, you have a very strange sense of location. You don't really know where you are. You could be somewhere else. You could be, sometimes it looks like the savannah of Africa. It looks like the Mediterranean place. And there are other types of nature, so many different landscapes. So it is a place that is somehow a little bit off from time and space. So that is also what we try to capture with the images in the film, the landscape images and the animals and so.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think it's the only place that llama, Indian cow, goats, zebra live together peacefully for a long time. And now it's kind of like a half a century that they have been living together in that island. And it creates very odd vision in a way. So I can start from the beginning. So we thought that maybe we could show different parts of the film, not as a trailer, but kind of like maybe we could talk and explain in between. And we saw maybe kind of 10 minutes of the film together. But just let me know if you.
We should maybe ask Anna and Leah, what do you think about time here? How much should we show the film? And you are monitoring this session, and what is your advice here?
I think, yeah, 10 minutes is fine. I think it's like important to see like part of Kupelwieser's story, part of Tito's, and maybe a bit of the visuals that you filmed in the past 2 years.
Mm. So 10 to 15 minutes maybe. Mm.
Yeah.
And I have to just mention that unfortunately the film doesn't have English subtitle yet. We wrote the text in English, and it was translated to German and Croatian, and the Paul Kupelwieser part is in German with Croatian subtitle, and Tito talks in Croatian. So, but we need to put, of course, English subtitle as soon as possible. So, okay, so. You hear the sound, right?
Die Bäume versperren die Sicht. Könnte ich vielleicht ein Glas Wasser haben? Danke.
Sie sollten die Bäume und Äste beschneiden. Wen kümmert's? Es ist ja nicht mehr meine Insel. Alle sagten, dass es wieder ein Geschäft für mich sei. Nur für mich. Aber das stimmte nicht. Ich brauchte kein Geld. Meine Eisenwerke hatten einen beachtlichen Aufschwung erlebt. Kriegsmaterial, meine Eisenproduktion, wurde an die Marinewerft Polas geliefert. Es war im Hafen von Pola, als ich das erste Mal ein nicht mit dem Festland verbundenes Stück Land sah. Einen Schatz. Ich hatte den Eindruck, dass es mit etwas Verständnis, Geduld und natürlich mehr Geld möglich sein würde, diesen Erdklumpen in etwas Gesundes, Fruchtbares, sehr Schönes zu verwandeln. Also kaufte ich 12 der 14 Brioni-Inseln. Es war im schönen Sommer 1893. Ich ließ ausgewählte Pflanzen und Samen aus London und Paris schicken, deren Anlieferung von der österreichischen Kriegsmarine abgewickelt wurde. Es gab eine groß angelegte Rodung. Der gesamte Archipel war mit Buschwald bewachsen, ungesunden Sümpfen, bösen Geistern. Es entstanden sanfte Waldlandschaften, wogende Wiesen, Promenadenwege für jede Jahreszeit. Eine Fantasieinsel mit allen exotischen Pflanzen. Und die antiken Ruinen waren auch da, um das Bild zu vervollständigen. Eine Insel ist nicht nur ein Stück Land. Eine Insel ist das Land, das den zivilisierten Menschen definiert. Können Sie sich ein Imperium ohne Inseln vorstellen? Österreich hat einige vage Anstrengungen unternommen. Therese-Inseln im östlichen Indischen Ozean. Sie haben sie verloren. Warum? Weil sie nicht gewillt waren, sie instand zu halten. 3 getrennte Versuche, die Inseln zu kolonisieren und sich niederzulassen, alle scheiterten. Das durch Malaria verursachte Fieber verlässt mich auch nach dem Tod nicht. Ich fühle mich schwach, auch nach dem Tod. Es ist in meinem Blut. Das einzige Souvenir aus meinem Land, von meiner Insel. Als ich gebissen wurde, hat mich das nicht sonderlich tangiert. Es war bei meinem ersten Besuch. Und es war eine Anopheles-Bücke mit ihren schönen, mehrfarbigen Regenbogenflügeln. Und die Malaria lässt mich immer noch Dinge sehen. Wunderschöne Farben. Unbekannte Strahlen des Lebens. Es war ein Ort zum Tanzen. Eine Utopie auf der Erde nach dem Krieg. Doch die Italiener verbaten das Glücksspiel. Ein Blitzschlag tötete die Polopferde. Er schaffte es nicht. Der Druck war zu groß für seine schwächliche Seele. Er nahm das Jagdgewehr in den Mund und richtete sich selbst. Damals war ich tot. Und ich hatte Visionen. Blitze und seltsame Blumen und Fische aus Silber. Er wurde in meinem Garten Eden begraben. In meinem Mausoleum, in der Nähe meiner Frau, seiner Mutter, Maria, während ich in Wien bin. Fehl am Platz. Mein Plan war es, dass sie die Weite der Landschaft meiner Insel kennenlernen würden. Die Ewigkeit des Lebens. Wenn sie nur die Bäume fällen würden.
Mogu li dobiti cigaru? Sastavio sam neke bilješke, jer imam priliku da vam se obratim. Htio sam zapisati što da kažem, a sad ne vidim smisla. Pretpostavljam da je onako uzalud, no ne može štetiti. Istina, povijesti čak ako i posve beskorisna. Svi moramo krojiti vlastita iskustva. Rekao bih vam koju o mojim dragim životinjama na Brionima. Imao sam neki tip križanca, menažerije iz zoološkog vrta. Simbol bogatstva. Koloniju. Imena sam imao mnogo. Morao sam ih imati mnogo imena, mnogo očiju, mnogo ušiju. Prvo da bih preživio. a potom da bi gledao stvari s različitih strana. I to mi je bilo napeto. Biti mnoštvo. I mnoštvo je postalo ja. Tito, to smo svi mi. Govorili su. Čistog zlata, poput srpskih kraljeva, praktična dijalektika bila je moje političko oruđe. Omogućila mi je da istodobno podržavam i Izrael i Arafata. Jedini sam ja vladao tim sintezama. Čujem da me zovu posljednjim Habsburgovcem. A onda sam nabacio svoje brionske halje, svoj panamski šešir. Postao sam Evropa. Središte Evrope preselio sam na Brione. Prava i moderna Evropa, vrhunska kvaliteta svega, prvoklasna. Svi su pohodili moju Evropu. Richard Burton došao je s Elizabeth Taylor. Engleska kraljica došla je sa šetlandskim ponijima. Evropa treba kolonije, ali moju su Evropu pohodile oslobođene kolonije. Čudesna nova sinteza. Leopard je bio tankoćutan, čuvstven, poput zatvorenika. Političkog disidenta. Sjetimo se, i sam sam godine proveo u zatvoru. Živio sam i u špiljama. Nikad me nije napustila ljubav prema špiljama. No, ponekad dođe do pogreške. Posjedovati zoološki vrt znači imati na raspolaganju koloniju. Uređivati granice, odlučivati tko smije živjeti, a tko će umrijeti. Naređivati suživot. No, ponekad dođe do pogrešaka, nenamjernih. 4 žirafe koje nisu doživjele starost umrle su progutavši vitamine zaražene salmonelom. Ostale su me životinje nadživjele. Dakako. Indira Gandhi poklonila mi je Sonija i Lanku. Bili su sretni zajedno. Nakon Sonijeve smrti Lanka je ostala sama. Znam to sve, znam. Neki cirkuski klaun pokušaju je kupiti, ali nisu mogli prevesti. Preteška je. Teška je. I usamljena. Ali smrt nikako da dođe. Razmišljam o Jovankinih posljednjih 20 godina. Još je uvijek u snazi, čini se. Kad je onaj kreten Ivo Sanader došao na Brione, uklonili su kokija. Bojali su se da će izgovoriti moje ime. Oči. Oči, što da vam kažem, sve je još uvijek ondje. U očima. Nakupljeno, koncentrirano. Jedini koji se usudi izgovoriti moje ime.
Yeah, I think we managed to present good proportion of the film.
It is, I don't know how you saw it, but it was a bit,
No,
the moments.
no, I didn't have any problem, so it's kind of perhaps.
I mean, it braked a little, but it didn't. It was okay for watching, not a problem.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think you got the kind of the idea of the film, so it's kind of like a good proportion of the film and different part of the footages and the strategy that we had for narrating the film. So one thing that, of course, you know, in order to create that narration, we thought that Paul Koppelwiesen because he got malaria, as he mentioned in the film, in the first visit from Pula. The first time that he went to Brioni from Pula, he was bitten by malaria mosquito. And as you know, if you get malaria, you have malaria. So he still have malaria, and the first thing that he asked is, "Can I have a glass of water?" And we play the same sort of different, of course, narration with Tito, that Tito asked, "Can I have a cigar?" And both of them, Kupelwiezen drinks the water at the end, and Tito light the cigar at the end. So there's a kind of like a creating drama of that desire of the dead.
We don't know if they still are dead, or if they come alive to speak to us, or if they are dead and able to speak. That is sort of open question. I think it's the later thing, that they actually are dead, but they have a chance to speak as dead. But I think both possibilities could be there in a way. Maybe we should just open for questions now, or what do you?
Yeah, we agree. We can open the floor and accept some questions, comments. So you are free to either write your question or comment directly in the chat, or you can just speak in the Zoom if you want.
While we are waiting, I have one question prepared for the two of you. So we have this figure of Kupelwieser as like this industrial magnate and capitalist who had this plan with Brioni, actually how to gain money, how to make it this like exclusive touristic resort. And on the other hand, we have Tito, who more view, I guess, Brioni as like this symbolic capital, this like political center. So how would you compare these two types of colonization of the island, of appropriation of the island?
Do you want Magnus to start with, or?
You can start.
Yeah. Well, well, you know, just we think that Kupelwiezen didn't do it for money. So at least is the way that we narrate the Kupelwieser part, that he strongly rejects that idea, that he even said that they say that I did it for money, but I didn't do it for money. So we think that he was trying to kind of claim the land, and the way that we wrote the narration, he always says that my land. And even when he talks about malaria, he says the only souvenir that I got from my land, I have it in my blood. He's proud of it. And economically wasn't really beneficial for him. So, and at the end, of course, it became very dramatic because he died, and Karl, his son, older son, inherited an island, and he couldn't manage it, and he even changed his name to Carlo, because in that period of time after the war, it was a territory of Italy. He changed his name from Karl to Carlo in order to be more acceptable by Italian, but he couldn't manage it, and he killed himself in an island. So we think that if we think about that psychoanalysis that we have done, we think that he was trying to prove proper way of creating a proper utopian island to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And then later on, Prince Ferdinand visited Brioni Island a couple of times, and is part of the document that we found that he wanted to claim the island because he thought that it shouldn't be privately owned, because the owner has to be kind of like a better kind of ownership. So there was a lot of challenges, and he could actually earn a lot of money by giving it to the empire, but he didn't do it. He resisted. He played a game. And I think in that sense, it's kind of related to the kind of the mentality perhaps that Tito had. So they use it as a form of representation, of form of idea, form of concept, rather than some sort of economical, beneficial strategy. Do you agree, Magnus? Or
yeah, I think I mean you said most of the things there already, and I totally agree. And even Tito said I didn't own anything. I mean, formally Tito didn't own the island, of course, but everything was at his disposal or at his convenience. So this is this double thing also with Tito, that he was the richest man in a way, and he had, I mean, everything was luxurious. He could have a very wealthy lifestyle there at the island, but formally he didn't own anything as well. And he, as he said in the film, was when I died, I only what my kids inherited was only my uniforms. So there is this loss in a way, and it's a utopian project, but it also slips through the fingers somehow, so to speak. Yeah.
There is another interesting fact in that sense, because Paul Koppelwiesen built his graveyard in the island when he was alive, and he died in Vienna, and he's buried in Vienna. So we thought that the main problem that he talks all the time about his graveyard, and he even from the beginning says that I cannot see the landscape. They have to come and cut the branches, because the idea was to create some sort of view toward the island. And now if you go, it's a kind of like a very isolated place in the island, and you cannot really see that vast farm in front of the graveyard that we thought that he meant to be very wide and very open area, to be able to see the whole island. So yeah, that's why the pain comes mainly from Koppelwiesen than Tito. Tito did great job basically there. He was really smartly basically presented the Brioni Island.
I don't know if we have maybe some question now from our audience. If not yet, I can jump in also with one question. We are definitely planning to show the exhibition in Brioni. It seems as a very logical point of a little trip of this exhibition to kind of be presented in that context. I'm curious to hear, what do you think, which aspects of your research can come to life in this context of Brioni? What do you think this specific location of the island could unpack for your own research and for the way that we might present it?
Yeah. Should I start, Behzad?
Yes, go ahead.
What is not present in a way, I mean, as a narration, as a story, is what's happened after Tito. This is not really, I mean, we have images, of course, from today, but we don't say what is happening with Brioni after Tito. And today, it's as you know, it's a natural park owned by the Croatian state, which is also a little bit odd when it comes to the facilities there, with the hotels that are state-owned, and the museum that is a museum of a museum, really kept, like a time capsule. So somehow we imagine that to show the film now, the presence of Brioni today will be, the third acting part in a way that the audience would experience on location, and I think that would give a very interesting resonance to the film itself. And it's always, as we also almost a bit tempted to make this like third chapter in a way of the film today. But I don't know if that's going to happen. But still, only the fact that we're going to hopefully show the film that will sort of add one chapter.
Sanya mentioned a very interesting point that maybe, well, I can, yeah, that is it still was no private ownership of the island, and is it still remind, hey, is it still reminds, so the family of Kupelwieser is still legally asking for their property, which is quite interesting, of course.
Really, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's the very interesting fact, actually. We didn't know that. And well, this is quite interesting aspect of that island. And maybe if I want to, follow up that, follow up Magnus' answer and answering to your question, yes, by looking at the current condition of Brioni Island, we could actually add another layer and level into the notion of ownership, privatization, and the facilities that you could see in Brioni Island. On the other hand, of course, having an exhibition in the specific site, it gives us possibility to go one step further and create. And there is, when I'm thinking about it, it could be actually interesting attempt to recurate the island, because it's not just kind of representation of film. So there is a lot of everything that we are talking is actually there. So how is it possible to re-narrate the whole island based on the way that we are looking at? And this, the fact that Sanya mentioned now, do you want Sanya to explain it more, because it's quite interesting fact.
No, I thought that you knew that it's a thing that when you Google, it's somewhere, like they I think that the family even has some kind of a website where they put all of these like legal documents that they were asking for restitution since I don't know when, for decades, and they were not able to get it, but they are still kind of in the process of complaining to some higher courts. I don't know, because yeah, legally they should be returned their ownership. I mean, this is the process that has been going on in Croatia, Yugoslavia since '91. That the nationalist private property was being restituted to the previous owners in certain cases. It's a very complex legal story, but many of these previous owners did get their private property back. So it is maybe not relevant whether they got it or not, but it is just it opens up this very important difference, if you want, because I was kind of intrigued by the previous question on the difference between these two reigns over the islands, and I think it is relevant that although Tito had at his disposal the island, but it was not privatized. It was no one's, no? And it still is so. And so I think it's also kind of related to the experience of being there in current circumstances where everything is so touristified on the coast, where you have like this kind of like amazing potential lucrative island, which is not really, let's say, exploited to the fullest, we would say. So the infrastructure and everything seems to be kind of like not well kept and whatever. And it seems as if it is waiting for a privatization, for like a real investment, to have everything right now. It seems like that. So I think it's like, I was just wondering, what is your take on, like, to speculate on the future, because you were speculating on the past. Like, can we imagine what would be the reign over the islands in future?
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, we have to think about it really, because partly, of course, it was very important struggle for us to narrate the the past, and is a very question that what is the future of this past. I'm familiar with the website. I don't have clear answer to that. Just there's a way that I have to talk more, and hopefully we could continue the project, not just one place after the other, but each time that we are presenting, we could really contextualize the other aspects of history and economy around it. But maybe Magnus, if you have any idea what the future could it be?
No, but I mean, the only thing I want to say there is that today, actually, maybe for the first time in 100 years, then over 100 years, it is actually accessible island for everyone in a way. I mean, formally it's open to everyone, and anyone can go there, and I think that's something beautiful, of course. And you have access to the beaches and to the areas, and you're free to explore the island, anyone. So it's a piece of amazing history that anyone can access in a way. And it would be very sad if that would be circumscribed or limited, and so. Yeah, let's hope it will not happen. That's the only thing I would say. I'm, of course, there's a high risk, as Sanja says, and it looks like there are many interests in this, but we hope it's not happening. Actually, I'm not. At least I am hoping that's not happening.
And we tried actually to challenge that idea of the in the editing of the film, because it's very, in all the films that you see from Brioni Island, the color of the island is very much high saturated. So the island is quite greenish, colorful, utopian, has a utopian color. And we decided to just reduce the color. We just kind of is grayscale, is black and white, in order to kind of not necessarily even compete with those kind of common image that you see from the island. One point that I have to mention, because in our work we have jumped from one part, very important part of the history. We talked about it, but we haven't elaborated properly, which is the Mussolini time. That Mussolini time, the fascist time in Brioni Island, and later on German Nazi was very important, of course, part of the history that we could look at, not necessarily just Brioni, but the fascist elements in that region in general. Anna, you're talking, but your microphone, I think, is.
Yeah, I was just commenting something. So we got also one question privately in chat, but maybe we can ask if somebody else has prepared a question. If not, I can read that one. So the question was, how do you see Brioni today, considering the fact that basically it's the only place in Croatia, except for Kumrovec, of course, where you can see this kind of quoted Tito exhibition? So how do you perceive?
Sorry, could you please repeat your question? I couldn't hear it properly.
How do you see Brioni today, considering the fact that it is the only place in Croatia, except for Kumrovec, of course, where you can see this kind of quoted Tito exhibition? So what do you think? How is it presented?
Yeah, it's for me, it's sort of heterotopia. It's a very much kind of sort of insecurity and uncertainty about the phenomenon that is there. They're not completely sure that they have to touch it or keep it untouched. So that dilemma actually is a cause that we have that form of representation as it was in '84. For me personally, it's amazing. As Magnus mentioned, it's exhibition within the exhibition. So it's quite amazing. I spend a lot of time in those exhibitions, and of course the historical fact is very interesting to look at it, but on the other hand, the curatorial strategy of presenting Brioni, which was very fascinating for me. And yeah, and I know that there is a lot of attempts in Croatia and of course in Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavian countries, in order to elaborate the research question that how is it possible to talk about that specific history. So, and I'm not really in position to answer that question, but I really respect all the people that they're struggling with that history to see that how is it possible to work with that, because it's not really, it's not very easy question to work with.
But I think it's very interesting that, I mean, this is a quite heroic representation of Tito time, the museum itself. The way it's not problematized, so to say, the history at Brioni. But of course, it's interesting that this is kept and not censored and changed in a way, or it's not even contextualized today, the museum. And this clash between this museum and the stream of tourists and from all over the world, I think that is, there is a kind of anachronistic, I don't know how to say it, it's a kind of strange encounter with the tourism and this museum representing a different time, uncommented and so on. Whereas the Kumrovec museum is a more sad museum, at least when I was there. And of course, every birthplace has a small museum only by default. But the Brioni Museum is more, I mean, I guess it would be easy to find arguments for doing something with this museum. But there is a sense of hesitation and reluctancy to do anything, and as if someone is waiting for something. And maybe that is actually exactly what, waiting for next move in terms of privatization or not, and so. Yeah, but there is this, if we speak about it historically, we are in this moment of hesitation probably at Brioni now.
I really hope that they manage to keep the museum as it is right now, because it's quite interesting to see. A lot of tourists are coming to Brioni based on that idea. There's a kind of fascinating place. There's a zoo, there's animals, and suddenly they found themselves within the kind of quite a strange history of Yugoslavia and Cold War. And I see, some people are confused in that museum, which I kind of I really like that.
It is confusing.
It's very confusing. Of course, it's very confusing, and just suddenly they started to. And of course, it depends on from which country you came from to Brioni. You find somebody who you know, and it's a kind of question that, oh, he was here. So sometimes I started to listen to some people that they were speaking English, and it was quite fascinating for me to see that how they're analyzing those images.
If I may also add just a thought regarding the circumstances in which the island is operating, it is very much important to know that it is a national park. So it has this like special category of nature protection, not so much about heritage, but mainly about nature, which is also kind of absurd knowing the history of the nature in the island. No? But it is also some kind of a guarantee of publicity, of public character of that area, which is again also a legacy of the socialist system, which kind of along with the nationalization or of that complex, it also put it in that special category, which I wouldn't bet that it would get that category nowadays, unless there was this kind of like very layered set of meanings surrounding that island. So there is like several aspects that are kind of I think upholding, as Magnus said, like they're keeping it still the situation that this museum looks like that nothing really changes there, and the hotel is the same as in the late 30s and whatever. So there are several factors, and I think it is very interesting kind of to think of how, what is going to happen, like how is it going to be. Is it possible that this situation continues on for decades?
We also have one question more in the group chat by Theo Prodromidis, so I'll just read it out loud. Congratulations on the film, looking forward seeing it and with the English subtitles. Without having the possibility to really enter the film, I have a rather open question on how you position yourselves as artists in regards to the more radical propositions of the non-aligned movement, and how did you position those in the text, both of the exhibition and the film? Thank you again, love the soundtrack.
Maybe you want to start with that one, Behzad.
Yeah, I can. Well, in short, we haven't elaborated the notion, the radical proposition toward non-aligned movement in that particular field. But we try actually to somehow represent the idea of non-aligned movement within the Tito's state of mind somehow in general. So we didn't really go into the details of non-aligned movement, somehow representation of non-aligned movement, summits, not non-aligned summit, but those meeting in Brioni Island, which somehow related to non-aligned movement, or as I mentioned in 1956, when Tito met Nehru and Nasser in Brioni Island. The narration basically tried to describe the idea of European identity from Tito's perspective. So it was actually mainly a turn in that specific film. However, of course, the history of non-aligned movement was very important part of the other project, A Monument to the Invisible Citizen, which Professor Balthazar and the Monument to the Invisible Citizen, and also the second chapter of my PhD. So it's a kind of like a very important. So I could tell you more kind of in detail what is my radical positionality in relation to history of non-aligned movement and the political of third world proposition that non-aligned movement, of course, offered since 1961, but I think is not necessarily part of this this film per se.
And also this is an opportunity to ask, is there any more questions? Maybe if there's somebody who will like to ask it now. Sorry.
I have a question, if I may ask. I couldn't see the movie. It's hard to come to Croatia at this sort of time, but without seeing it, I would just like to ask if did you try to address a class question or raise the class question in your movie, in terms of that the island was perceived as a luxury or kind of exclusive place among the society, Yugoslav society mostly, but both figures were kind of, even though from different background, and where one did possess the island, the other one did not formally, but they were both men in power, able to be there and do all the stuff they did, and whether good or for their own pleasure, or claiming that they did for the benefit of society or whatever. But I'm just trying to find out if you raised that question as well in the movie.
Maybe Magnus, could you?
Well, I mean, yes, I think there's a very strong class question, of course, in the film, that it was built for the noblesse. It was built for the upper class. It was all designed for that purpose of being luxurious resort. And one thing we talked about is, which I think Behzad also pointed out after his last visit, you don't find any traces of socialism on the island. In the film, in the narration of the film, we elaborate this idea that Tito was an expertise on we call it practical dialectics, that he created synthesis. And he created the synthesis of a worker and an aristocrat, the north and south and east and west. But actually, Brioni Island itself doesn't bear any witness of socialist practice of any kind. And not in architecture, and well, we don't find that part. Well, the museum tells its own story, but that's also the brave story, and it's a story of the man of the world, the man who received all the nobilities of the world. So that one might propose is also a continuation, kind of continuum, as we said, from the Austrian-Hungarian time. Although Tito would, of course, present totally different reasons for keeping this utopia than Kupelweiser did. The arguments was totally different. That this was given to him, and this was to create the world of itself, a representation of the non-alignment movement on this geography.
Yeah, on one hand, we could describe it, of course, as the way that Magnus described it. On the other hand, we could say that well, Tito opened up the Brioni Island, but not necessarily to the people of Yugoslavia, but to the people from Global South. So this is quite interesting that he opened up for he opened up the idea of European identity from a colonial perspective toward Third World, and invited them there, which was actually quite interesting way to work with that idea of non-aligned movement in a way. So it was quite smart in a way when you look at it. But of course, when it comes to Yugoslavia, so it was kind of like maybe the class dimension, the equality in that sense, goes toward the global sense rather than local.
Any more questions, or we could also slowly close this conversation?
And we would also like to invite all of you who are either in Zagreb or traveling to Zagreb by any chance to come and see the exhibition and also watch the entire film. It will be on until the 23rd of December.
And we will have one more guided tour by Anna and me on the 9th of December.
At 6.
At 6.
Yeah.
So, thank you a lot for your participation, Magnus, Behzad, for the intro to your work, and all of the people who posed questions. Hopefully we see you in Zagreb in the exhibition, and follow up. So we really hope that we show the film next year in Brioni as planned. And also I think there will be the opportunity to see the film potentially in some other context as we spoke. Maybe
participating.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Yes, closing.
Hi. Our internet completely crashed. So.
Okay, great.
I don't know how much of our goodbye speech did you hear?
No, we didn't hear that, but we hope we're sure it was good.
Yeah, we just invited everybody to come to see the exhibition who haven't.
And we said we would be happy to share the link for those who are not able to come. So, so those who took part of this session.
Yeah.
So I will send a Vimeo link and a password to you, and then if you ask Anna or Lea, so you could have the link.
Yeah, great. See you all, and thank you for your participation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye.